It is now 6 o'clock and time to call the City of Oak Harbor Planning Commission regular meeting to order. Today is May 24, 2022. Due to COVID-19, this will be both a physical meeting location and a virtual meeting per Washington Proclamation 20-28. Meeting may be viewed live via YouTube. To leave a public comment that will be made part of the meeting record, you may attend in person or please call and leave a message at 360-279-4512 no later than 5 p.m. the day prior. First item on the agenda this evening is roll call. Let the record show that Commissioners Freeman and Southard are absent. The second item on the agenda this evening is the approval of the minutes, April 26, 2022 regular meeting. Do I have a motion?
Motion to approve.
I have a motion. A second?
I can second.
Call for the question. All in favor?
Aye.
I abstain because I wasn't here.
Aye.
Approval is, okay, the minutes have been approved. The third item on the agenda is public comment. The Planning Commission will accept public comment for items not otherwise on the agenda for the first 15 minutes of a Planning Commission meeting. We received nothing on that except for there will be one item that Senior Planner Ray will address when he does his presentation. Item 4 are public meetings and hearings. We are going to take item B first this evening, and that would be the housekeeping code amendments. This is a public hearing, and it's going to be presented by the Director David Kuhl, and I would like to, at this time, open up the public hearing. David?
Members of the Commission, tonight we're going to talk a little bit about what's known as text amendments to our Development Services Code. I have 4 items for you tonight. This process is called housekeeping. It's where we come back and we identify code changes that have been needed for a while. We make small changes as well as other significant changes all in one batch. And that way we don't have to advertise and send out separate notices on every single item. So that's what housekeeping is. We're going to clarify that tonight. The 4 areas of code that we'd like to pursue are in the zoning ordinance and the development code. We've received feedback from the Planning Commission at the last meeting, and so we took that under advisement. And we do have the fire chief here tonight for several questions you had on one of the first changes, which dealt with fire sprinklers. So Fire Chief Ray Merrill is here. And so I'll go through the presentation in its entirety, and then, Mr. Chairman, with your permission, go ahead and ask him questions. The first one is fire sprinklers, and that's section 805050. Fire sprinklers would be required under this provision in duplexes and townhomes. Currently, they are not. Usually you use firewalls and other techniques, but the fire department would like to add this provision. The reason is there's been a number of fires recently in these type of buildings, and so this is a public safety issue. These needs will be met by the design through the NFPA 13D, which is a fire code section that the fire chief will talk about. The next section of code we'd like to amend is the existing buildings code, and that's a section within the Oak Harbor Municipal Code, section 805.020. And what we'd like to do is match up the existing buildings code with the non-conforming code. The reason is sometimes when you have different language, they're harder to interpret. And so we wanted to make sure they're exactly the same. And as you recall, in the last meeting, we talked about 50% of the real valuation or 60%. Our proposal is to bring it back down to 50% so that the existing building code will match the non-conforming code. We also had some challenges with the language, and so what you see up there on the first sentence is alteration or restoration of a building at 50% of its real valuation exclusive of foundations. And that's identical to the non-conforming code. So we wanted to match those up exclusively. If you might remember last time, we called it current replacement value, and that got confusing for everybody using different terms. And so we've matched up those two terms to be exactly the same. And that makes our job easier as well as it makes the public's job easier when they have language that's easier to interpret. So more consistency is the goal there. Next section is permitted uses in the industrial district, section 19.20.730. Ray Lindenberg did a real nice job last year and created a zoning matrix, and that's what we use to interpret the zoning ordinance. There was a section of industrial code that was overlooked at that time, and so that's still in the code, and we just like to take that out so it's not confusing. And so all this would do is delete that additional unneeded language. So that's a fairly straightforward use of the housekeeping provision. The last one is accessory dwelling units, and that's section 19.42.050. Accessory dwelling units currently require an owner to live on the property. And that came out of an old code provision that had been around a long time. Folks felt that an owner should live on the property to watch what's happening when you have a accessory dwelling on the property. People thought that that might cause more neighborhood problems. We have found that's not necessarily the case. The other additional reason we'd like to take that out is because we're densifying neighborhoods right now. The provision that you'll see next is Ray Lindenberg talking about density. And so we're seeing more and more units being developed next to each other on existing lots, on large lots where we're having higher density housing. So we just don't feel that it's really a provision that's necessary anymore to have a covenant recorded against the property and have the owner sign the agreement to allow that to happen. So we'd like to just take that provision out, and it will make things easier, particularly when people are trying to sell their property. So this will just delete that unneeded language that we have in there. So future meetings, next up after you consider this, the City Council will take this in a public hearing, June 7th. And this is your recommended motion. So we are available for any questions you may have.
Thank you, David. Commissioners, any questions for Police Chief Merrill?
Absolutely. Good evening. A couple of things. One of the questions was, will this just be for new units, or will this also fall under the amendment of 50% renovations to existing units, or are you going to retro this for all units in the city?
Okay, so I've got three questions there.
Or it was actually a multiple choice.
Multiple choice,
right.
A, B, and C.
So is it?
So,
Yep.
let's hit them one at a time. This is for new construction, and it will also cover buildings where you have a 50% threshold. Let's say an apartment house catches on fire.
Mm-hmm.
When it hits the 50% threshold, it's going to be required to be sprinkled.
Yep.
In order to meet, under our International Fire Code regulations, it says that all R occupancies are to be sprinkled with a fire sprinkling system. All are. Our code typically or specifically exempts 1 and 2 family dwellings under that requirement. The change we're looking for is to take the 2 family dwellings out, with the exception of townhomes. Townhomes is a really interesting type of structure. It could have 3 or 4 or 5 individual single-family dwellings under one roof. In order to meet the requirements of a townhome, it has to be from grade level to the underside of the roof a 1 hour separation with a 1 inch airspace and a 1 hour separation between unit to unit. And they're considered to be on their individual lot lines. The way the code reads, that would be considered a single-family dwelling. Our intent is to change that where townhomes now have to be sprinkled as our other R occupancies. No, we're not going to go back and require retrofitting to all existing units unless they were to do a remodel or have a fire and hit the 50% threshold.
Great.
Does that answer your question?
Absolutely, thank you.
Okay.
Second question I have is, concern came up last time that right now affordable housing is a big issue around the country, let alone here on the island. Not for our business here as a planning commission, but have you been asked by the council, or you plan on passing on to the council, what the approximate cost this is going to add per square foot to future buildings?
Yes, and I've talked to some different companies. Now, the interesting part about a 13D system out of the NFPA, there's 13, 13R, and 13D. A 13D is considered a dwelling, which means a licensed plumber that's been licensed by the state of Washington to install fire sprinkling systems can install the sprinkling system while they're doing their regular plumbing work inside of the structure. You don't have to bring in a specific fire sprinkler company to do that work, which in essence reduces the cost. In our local area, when I talk to 3 different contractors locally, and locally is going to be Arlington, Marysville, and northern Snohomish County, they said $350 to $450 per square foot, depending on the complexity of the project. When we talked to some contractors out of Seattle, some plumbing contractors in Seattle, they said we're $1.25 to $1.50 a square foot. There was a company from Bellingham that quoted out $8.80 a square foot, which is sky high. There's absolutely no reason for a 13D system to be that expensive. A 13D runs off the domestic water main, which means you turn on a faucet, water flows through the inner part of the sprinkler, not out the flow pattern, but it's a flow-through system, so water is flowing through that system all the time. So a licensed plumber, while they're doing their work on the structure, can drill some more holes, run PEX pipe, plastic pipe, and their snap-on connections. And with the 13D, there are some areas that are not required to be sprinkled. One is garages. 2 is bathrooms under 55 square feet. 3 is closets under 24 square feet. So what we're looking at is sprinklers in living space, bedrooms, kitchen.
Thank you.
I have a couple of questions. Can you all hear me?
Sarah?
Sorry. This is Commissioner Shaw. So thank you for this presentation. I was wondering a couple of things. One, thank you for giving us a square foot average, and it's useful to know that an average plumber could do this work. I just in personal experience lately in Oak Harbor, all of our local plumbers are exceptionally backed up. And I didn't mean to make a plumbing joke there, but it's taking 3-4 months or more to get on their calendar for any type of job. And I recently tried to get plumbers for a job I have in one of my commercial buildings, and I could not get the vast majority of plumbers I called were off island, but within a 30 to 40 minute radius refused to come to Whidbey Island. I finally found one. But this tells me that if anyone is in a building or permitting process right now, or is in a build out, that this might cause some significant delays. And if there's anything that we need right now, it's more housing, right? So I'm wondering, one, when would this take effect? And when would constructions be impacted by it? Maybe it's necessary to give more of a grace period for things that are currently underway or might be built out in the next year. 2, I would just say, it's even though it's more accessible with a plumber, it doesn't mean that we'll necessarily have the capacity in Oak Harbor to have those plumbers do those type of jobs. And I would wonder do our local plumbers or those willing to come to the island, are they willing to do this work? Do they feel competent and skilled and trained to do this work? And then on the ADU units, I'm excited to see things loosening up for ADU units, but I would caution us that if we have ADU units, perhaps we should have a line in there that says that an owner isn't required to be on property if these are 9 months or beyond leases. I would hate to see where more and more of our housing is eaten up by Airbnbs and VRBOs, especially ADUs, which are designed to be a more affordable housing unit. And if you take a look at Airbnb in Oak Harbor, it's actually pretty surprising how much of our more affordable real estate is being taken up by Airbnbs. So I would suggest maybe we consider adding some language that if there are long-term renters, no owner has to be on site. Thank you.
Thank you. Sarah?
Can I clarify a couple things? And I didn't understand everything she said. I mean, some of it was rather garbled.
Yes.
But one is, it can't be just any plumber that installs these systems. It has to be one that has been licensed by the state of Washington. And when we see their plans, we check to make sure that they have met the requirements to be a competent installer of a 13D system. So it can't be just any plumber that's local. Secondly, I caught the part about the question of if a project's already, when is this going to take place? If we've already received plans for a structure going up, these do not apply to those structures. It'll only be buildings that'll be built after this ordinance is enacted. So if there's no plans available right now that's on the table, then as soon as somebody puts plans in after this goes into effect, that's when it becomes effective to be done. So if there's buildings going on right now, they are not affected by this. So that can be part of the planning process when we talk about 3 to 4 months out.
Okay, and then, can you hear me now? Okay.
Yes,
Hello?
go ahead.
Okay, great, thank you. On the plumbers, the licensing from Washington State, how many plumbers do we have who agree to serve North Whidbey right now?
Wow, that's an open-ended question because there's currently one plumbing company on the island that's licensed to do 13D. There's 5 plumbing companies in Anacortes that are licensed. There's 2 in Marysville. There's 3 in Arlington. So they are in the vicinity to do the work. As far as specifically on the island, I've only found 1 that is currently licensed.
Okay, so I would suggest that we do further homework to confirm how many we have in the pipeline who agree to serve North Whidbey, given that I've had the direct experience recently of trying to get plumbers and their wait time is several months, and those who are in the immediate vicinity who you would think, like, oh, they're in Anacortes, they're in Mount Vernon, are saying they're refusing to come to Oak Harbor. So it's just out of their range. They don't come to Oak Harbor anymore. They're so busy. So my concern is that if we don't give ourselves more time with this implementation, that builders will find themselves in the place of significant wait times to get on the list of the small number of plumbers who are able to do this work. So I'd recommend that we wait on this until we confirm the number of plumbers, or set a minimum number of plumbers that need to be certified in the area before this takes effect. Thank you.
Question for the commission. Would that be something that we would recommend to the city council, and it would be a city council issue if they want to delay the implementation of this for the availability of plumbers in the area, or would that be a planning commission vote?
You could put it in your recommendation to the council, right, David?
Yeah,
So
you
if
can
you
make
wanted to do it subject to recommendation, then you certainly could do that. I know there has been some discussion at the council in delaying it. Typically, our ordinance take effect right away, but the council could certainly put a time period on it. And I know the concern right now is with the current backlog in labor, but you know, who knows, we might go into a recession and the price may go way down. It's hard to tell, but certainly that's something of consideration. And to answer the other question on the ADUs, we could do the Airbnb as a separate ordinance. I know Coopville and Langley did that, and there's certainly a correlation between Airbnbs and usage and taking away affordable housing, and I've done it in other communities. We haven't had a lot of complaints in the city, so we haven't brought it forward, but we certainly allow, some people are shocked how easy it is to come in, get a business license and pretty much allow it. But I mean, if there's consideration on the, to look at that separate, it's kind of a separate issue. It kind of ties to it, but it does with ADUs, but not everything's ADUs. That would be Airbnb, and if we wanted to zone it out in certain areas, that's certainly a possibility to do it. And it's kind of been on our to-do list, but because we haven't had a lot of push for it, like other communities have, we haven't done it, but it's certainly something we can bring up, and certainly we have models with other communities that have been a lot more restrictive. We haven't been restricted at all with Airbnb usage, but it does affect neighbors, and it does affect affordable housing. Certainly, those are usually what people buy for, is a lot of the affordable housing, and then turn it into transient Airbnb, so they don't usually buy the real expensive ones. So there is a correlation there.
Mr. Chairman, I spoke to our finance director, David Goldman, and he informed me that last year, 5 to 10% of our lodging tax came from Airbnbs. We don't know where they all are because we don't have an ordinance to track them, but we do have a way of tracking them through the State Department of Revenue, where you're required to pay taxes for that. So that means 5 to 10% of the units are Airbnbs, and everything else is all the revenue coming from hotels in town. So it would seem like it's not a big number, but certainly, as the city administrator mentioned, maybe as part of a separate topic, we can explore as staff working on that.
Commissioner Chazar?
Yeah. One question for housekeeping. If we pass this recommendation, housekeeping recommendation, does the city council have the option of breaking it up into 4 or 5 pieces or eliminating one piece of it? And so if the council decides they want to pass 4 of the housekeeping items but hold off on the sprinkler requirement, they have that option, don't they?
I think the council could do an implementation date on the one section for fire sprinklers in the ordinance. They could modify it, and then everything else could take effect at a different time.
Great, thank you.
I'm not certain. I'm going to just throw this out. When you, the planning department, gets a project on the table in front of them, the folks that are recommending that to do the work on building that, wouldn't they have all this in place at that time? I mean, wouldn't they have the plumbers that they needed, et cetera, on a timetable that would be good for their project? I'm sure they wouldn't entertain hiring someone that might be 6 months out when they want to get going tomorrow. Is that the way it works?
Good point, Mr. Chairman. Normally, that's the way it works. You have all your subs lined up, and you have your work schedule, and you have it planned out. Some developers are on top of that, and others might not be. There is one existing multifamily project ongoing now. I think they have all their permits, which means obviously the 13D would not apply to McKinney Place on 3rd Street. But I'm not aware of any other multifamily units proposed at this time. most of what we're going to see in the next 6 months are single-family homes. So, I mean, that can change. There certainly could be some multifamily project we have not contemplated yet come through the door, but this is a code change for the long run, not just for next week, so to speak.
Well, I guess what I'm trying to say is that it would just be another thing that needs to be put in the works, in the plan, in the planning of a project. Correct, Merrill?
That is correct.
I mean, you just have to plan for it going forward, whenever it becomes effective. It's not like you have to go out and find somebody separate, because now you do, when it becomes part of our code, then it needs to be, adhered to.
And if I may speak to that for a moment, that all becomes part of the permitting process. So that when a set of plans is received and we see that it's a condo, we know that's going to be a sprinkled building because it's an R occupancy. That's a given. When we see that it's going to be a townhome, we know that's going to be under the new requirements, that's going to be a sprinkled unit. And when they get ready to go out and do their design, bid, and build, that's part of the bidding process, is you know who your plumbers are going to be in order to bid that project out. So the only drawback locally is we currently only have one company that is licensed to do 13D. That doesn't mean the other companies cannot become certified to do it. It's just a case of applying to the state, getting your license, and being an installer.
Thank you.
Commissioner Plumley
yes.
has his hand raised.
Oh, Commissioner Plumley.
Thank you. So a couple questions I had was if I understand correctly, when a permit was done for the sprinklers, if it's a garage, it does not require a sprinkler. Is that correct?
That is correct.
What would happen if somebody submitted a permit to turn their attached garage into an ADU?
That would not trigger sprinkling that structure because that structure is still a single-family dwelling. It's not considered a multifamily dwelling at that point, even with the ADU switching a garage over to a bedroom.
Thank you, Chief. My other question was, when we talk about the owners of a property not being on the property for an ADU, I'm assuming that the property owner is renting out both the ADU and the main home. So what would that do for, say, mail, utilities, water, address, as now you have two complete strangers with no connection to the ownership of the property living on that property in tandem? Has that been considered as we go forward with the plan to not have an owner on site?
Thank you, Commissioner Plumley. Yes, we did talk about that internally. And essentially what you'll have is two rental units, or you could have an owner living on the site as well as a renter. It's really no different than renters living throughout town, where they can be living on one property or several properties with several different homes. So there really isn't any difference between an accessory dwelling unit and two dwelling units being in the same vicinity. Blaine has a question.
Thank you.
Yes, Blaine.
Just to add to that a little bit, it's my understanding from at least one of the city council members who has a lot of experience on this topic, that this was an intent of the council to take out that residency requirement. And so that's why this kind of falls into the housekeeping too, because we weren't aware of it. And so it was their intent on some of their goals with ADUs to remove that requirement to make it more flexible. So that's why this is kind of a cleanup issue, because the council never did the ordinance change, but their intent was always to do this. But certainly the new council could change its mind, but that was the intent of past council.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other comments, questions, commissioners? Yep. So I'm going to call for a motion then.
I move to recommend that the City Council approve the text amendment to the Oak Harbor Municipal Code related to housekeeping.
I have a motion. I need a second. Anybody?
I second.
Thank you. Motion and a second. Call for the question. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Did you get that, sir? Yeah. Sarah? Commissioner Schott?
Yep, nay.
Nay. Okay. And Commissioner Plumley is yay?
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you.
At this time, close the public hearing. Okay, the next item on the agenda this evening is brought to us by Senior Planner Ray Lindenberg, and it's the Density Standards Code Amendment. And this also is a public hearing. And at this time, I will open the public hearing and call on Senior Planner Ray Lindenberg.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the Planning Commission. I'm going to do a fairly brief presentation tonight regarding this potential code amendment. We did get some public comment, and I'll discuss that at the end of the presentation as well, but I feel like we've kind of gone through the process and the background on this pretty extensively in the past, so I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on that. We're just going to pretty much dive into the actual code changes itself. So I'm going to share my screen here real quick. Again, this is an update to our residential dimensional standards within the residential zone districts. Brought forth by the Housing Action Plan that was approved back in 2021, and the recommendations of that plan. We have some grant funding that is paying for some of this process as well, so we're utilizing that. We got some dimensional standards through our review process and our kind of investigation of making these changes from some peer cities within the state that are of similar size to Oak Harbor. That's a brief list of them right there. And then we went through and identified some potential alternatives to our existing code. And when we went through that process, we developed a couple of different concepts for making changes. And those two concepts were based on the lot size concept, which made the zoning changes based on the lot sizes themselves. And then we also had a density concept. And we determined that with the changes to the code with the lot sizes, we were making changes to the density as well. So we should probably just go ahead and approach it from that angle. And the City Council and Planning Commission, I believe, agreed with us as staff from that standpoint. So we went forward with a code change that's based on the density standards instead of lot size standards. And that's something that other cities have done. And I got in touch with some planners from other cities that have gone in that direction, and they say it seems to work really well for them. It allows a little bit more creativity in site design and layout, but at the same time, it doesn't require anybody construct or develop very small lots. It just allows them to if they want to, and reduces the reliance on the PRD process, which is kind of slowed down development a little bit, and it has made it so that some of these smaller lots, more infill type situations are not really able to take advantage of that because they have to have a minimum area of open space that doesn't work in a smaller infill property. So this would hopefully open up some of those infill smaller areas to development based on being able to do some smaller lots that are more appropriate for the site. So what we have is, like I said, I'm just going to kind of launch into what the changes are. You have a copy of the draft ordinance attached to your staff report, but just kind of go over what's in there. Pretty much what we're looking at is in the R1 district, and these changes are throughout all of the different zones, some of them, but the ones that are different as I go through this, you'll see. So in the R1 district, we have an increase in the maximum density going from 6 units per acre up to 9 units per acre. It's not a huge difference, but it is notable. We have the removal of the minimum lot sizes. We have a reduction in the minimum lot width and depth, and that goes down to 40 feet wide by 80 feet deep. And what we have there is kind of a de facto minimum lot size, right? Instead of saying that your minimum lot size is 6,000 or 5,000 square feet, we have put minimum width and depth numbers in there. And so essentially you do have a minimum lot size of 3,200 square feet. We also have reductions in setbacks to allow for a reasonable sized house on a much smaller lot, potentially. We're going from 7,200 down to 3,200. That's a pretty significant change. So we're going to reduce those setbacks, mostly on the sides, but also in the front and into the back with some of the other zone districts. And then also having an increase in the maximum lot coverage. We have a front yard setback to living space of 10 feet, and living space will include the inside of the house. It also includes front porch or patios, things like that, anything that might have a roof over it. If, for instance, you have living space overhanging a front porch or stoop, you could do that down to 10 feet. But the key to that is we do still require a 20-foot setback to the garage, and that has a couple of reasons behind it. And one of those is to allow for parking in the driveway without overhanging onto sidewalks and public right-of-way, and also so you don't get just a wall of garage doors as you look down a residential street, because that can easily happen when you have narrower lots and narrower homes. The garage does take up more space percentage-wise of the frontage of the house, so we're going to try and minimize that appearance by requiring that the garage be set back at least 20 feet. In our R2 district, we have those same changes to the minimum lot size, dimensions, and setbacks, but we also have an increase in the minimum density. What we're trying to do is create more of a separation between or more of a distinction, I should say, between the R1 and R2 district, making the R2 district clearly more dense option than the R1 district. In R3, again, we increased the minimum density slightly. We made a revision to taller structure setbacks, and essentially what that is when you have a structure that's over 2 stories in height, there is an additional setback required. We left that in there. We just put it in a different location to make it a little bit more clear to read, a little bit better organized. So we didn't change anything with that. We just relocated it within the code. And then we have specific language regarding entrances to parking structures. And what that language says is that if you have a parking structure or parking garage and it has a driveway going to it, as long as that driveway is not providing parking, then you can have the smaller 10-foot setback. If there's any parking occurring on the driveway, it has to have the 20-foot setback so that you can, again, maintain those vehicles without having overhanging into a sidewalk or a public right-of-way. In the R4 district, we don't have any changes to the density regulations. We have the same situation with the R3 when you enter a parking garage, if it's just a driveway to the parking garage with no parking on the driveway itself. And then one final change in the RO district, and I hadn't brought this up before because it came up more recently, is we inserted the density standards there in the R4 district, the 12 to 22 units per acre, into the R4 district, because previously, before we made some of those code changes, there was a reference in the RO district that the density standards would match that of the R4. And that got removed. We didn't notice it until fairly recently, so we're putting it back in so that it's clear that if you're doing residential in the RO district, which is a permitted use, that we are doing the density standards based on the R4 zone district, which is how it's been done in the past. So that is kind of, in a nutshell, the revisions to our code. We gave you the copy of the red line strike-through version so you can see the new versus the old text. But we did have a public comment that came in fairly recently, unfortunately, after we sent out the packet. And I will forward it to you all via email this evening, and I don't want to read through the entire thing here, but the main thrust of this comment is a very legitimate concern that we have here. is that somebody is suggesting, and this is one of our local developers who worked on the McKinney Place project and some other projects within the community, is to allow for additional language in the R2 and R3 zones to allow for a 0 side yard setback. And one of the ways that, that's been done in other communities is to allow 0 on one side, maybe not on another, or to allow 0 side yard setbacks and essentially allow for the development of townhomes. And so this is something that we did not include in our code because it was something that we address already through the PRD process. And if somebody wants to go through a PRD, what they can do is ask for variations to our code standards that are found in the zoning districts. And sometimes that has allowed for lessened setbacks, much smaller setbacks, 3 feet or 5 feet on the side, smaller setbacks, smaller lot sizes, and other things that go along with doing smaller lots. In this situation, the comment is saying, well, maybe we need to include a provision for that just in the zoning code itself without having to go through that PRD. And to be perfectly honest, this is not something that staff has discussed, so we're not really prepared at this point to give you too much information on, whether or not that is a workable solution. It is definitely a suggestion, and it's something worth considering. So in our in the staff report, it gives you an option to do a recommendation to the city council for approval of this code. However, after kind of thinking about this a little bit, it might be a good idea to leave the public hearing open to have a discussion this evening about the information that's presented before you tonight, but also to have staff go back and take a look at this 0 side yard setback issue, unless it's something that the Planning Commission feels like, well, we've already addressed this through the PRD process. Because it is addressed, you can do 0 lot line or 0 side yard setbacks through a PRD process. And maybe that's the way that we need to approach it, is if you're going to go down to 0, then you gotta go through a PRD. If you can, get a 5 foot side yard setback just through a standard process, then we can just do that. And so that's kind of where we're at with that. Like I said, I think these are very legitimate comments that that this person has shared with us. At the same time, I don't know if that's the direction we're going to go or if we want to go, and I want to leave that kind of up to the Planning Commission. I hate to kind of spring this on you at the last minute, but that's sometimes how it works when we get these comments. If somebody come in this evening and made these same comments, I think we'd be kind of in the same boat. So that being said, I will kind of wrap up my presentation here and open it up to the Planning Commission for any comments or discussion that you might want to have. Again, we can do a positive recommendation to the City Council for the ordinance adoption based on what is presented to you tonight, or we can leave the public hearing open and consider revisions based on the comments that we've received. So, like I said, I'll end there and open up for any discussion that we might have.
Ray, so if I understand you correctly, you really aren't prepared tonight to pursue this new wrinkle, if you would. So wouldn't it be best for us to continue this in light of the...
I think that's the philosophical discussion, is if we want to consider this, staff can go back and look at it and do a little bit more research and a little bit more investigation into the possibility of allowing for that, or if the Planning Commission is comfortable with going forward without allowing for 0 lot line as essentially, and this is what it would do, is if we change that code to say 0 side yard setback in certain zone districts, that would allow for it by right. It wouldn't allow for it, you'd be able to just apply for it without any kind of additional consideration. And the PRD, requires additional consideration, whether that's, a greater level of landscaping or exterior design standards, open space, those sorts of things. And, when you think about it, it's already there. it's working as intended from that standpoint. Our goal with this particular code revision was to allow for those smaller infill lots to be more easily developed. And I don't know if we want to go all the way to the point where we're allowing 0 side yard setbacks and attached homes without a PRD. So that's just kind of philosophical and a discussion item. If you want to direct us back to take a look at, looking at doing 0 side yard setbacks, we can certainly do that.
Commissioners, any other comments? Commissioner Chaya?
Ray, I kind of like the idea that we leave the ordinance as it is without adding back in the zero. We have a tendency in this, not just this community, but lots of communities where people look for loopholes, and if we put this in writing into the code, then we will be set with it. And if a development, I can't think of one off the top of my head, but if something comes before us that we don't like as a community, but it is in the ordinance and that it's allowed, we would be forced to allow that developer to do it that one time until we have a chance to change the ordinance. By letting it go to the PRD, at least we, as a community, can review the project without putting this into law, the 0 setback. So that's my opinion, is we let the ordinance go through as is right now to the city council. And if city council wants us to re-review it at 0 setback, then we'll review it then, or they can add it back in.
Commissioners, any other discussion?
So my question is, who would be looking to do this? Like who would this be affecting to have this kind of development? Like what kind of homes?
I mean, it would be anybody who was looking to do any sort of residential development in an R1 through RO zone district. Typically, in this community, we build a lot of single family homes. There's not a lot of multifamily development. And so this really does affect the single family and duplex style homes the most because it would allow for a single family home on a lot down to 3,200 square feet instead of 7,200 square feet, which is a pretty significant change. The process that I went through that we've discussed in the past showed that a lot of the recent developments when using the PRD process was typically lots in the 3,500 to 4,000 square foot range, sometimes a little bit bigger than that. But the PRD was being used frequently to lower the lot sizes so that you could fit more homes onto a property. And at the same time, you still have to meet those density standards. So there's kind of a give and take there. You can get the smaller lots, which in theory should make things a little bit more affordable, but at the same time, the PRD process is really better suited for much larger projects. And for projects that have, ample open space opportunities. When I look at a project like the Wynn Short Plat, where they built some new homes over on Ely Street, just south of Whidbey Avenue there, all those lots are 7,200 square feet, which doesn't make a ton of sense in such a small context. That lot was fairly small. So they were only able to put a handful of homes on there. If we had this in place, it would allow, 2 or 3 more houses to be constructed in the same amount of space there. The reason that they didn't go through a PRD process was the requirement that they have to have open space. And open space is not just, a percentage of the land and the property. It also has to measure a certain minimum dimension within that property. For an active open space, it has to be at least 50 feet wide by 90 feet deep, which is almost 5,000 square feet, which is essentially another lot. And so that's why they chose not to go through a PRD process for that particular subdivision, because they weren't going to gain that many housing units out of it. And they were also going to have to pay a significant amount of money to do landscaping for an open space and have an HOA to take care of it and all that sort of thing. So that's where we're at, is we're trying to make it simpler for the smaller infill lots, while still allowing for that flexibility and some of the things that go on with the PRD process for the larger ones.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Any further comment, commissioners?
Yes, Commissioner, I have one. So, Ray, can you help me? Did I understand the intent of that message correctly? That it sounds like what they're asking for with the 0 foot setback is the ability to build duplexes, triplexes without necessarily with the same type of ease as if they were building a single family home. And at least the thought in that message was that by having that setback, it would encourage developers to do that on a more regular basis. Was that the message in that comment?
I think it would certainly make it easier to develop townhome type projects in smaller areas. The concern that I would have with that is that when you have a 0 lot line situation, you're creating a manner in which the development occurs so that you have a rear yard on a house that may not be accessible for somebody to use a lawnmower, right? And so you're going to kind of lock in the landscaping choices and the lifestyle choices to whoever's in that middle unit because they can't get a lawnmower without pushing it through their living room. And so to me, in that situation, you need to be careful because it seems like there should be a provision of some open space that has grass, for people to go run around with their kids or their dog or what have you. And to me, the PRD works for that. It works for that because it requires that open space. And granted, it doesn't get the density in the same way that the Wind Short Plat, like I mentioned, but at the same time, that was in R1 zone district, and that doesn't allow for multifamily units. And so in your R1 and R2, those both allow for single family, and R2 allows for duplexes. And what would be considered there is a duplex would be 2 units on 1 lot, essentially. So you would still have the duplexes immediately adjacent to each other because that's what a duplex is. You just wouldn't have them lined up down the road, all connected together. And so you'd still have, 5 foot setback on either side of the duplex, and they would be connected. To me, if we're going to start doing more than 2 units together and getting into townhomes, that starts to go in. Number one, that's an R3 project anyway, because that's quote unquote multifamily with what our ordinance says. So that's an R3 and R4 project, which is allowing greater density anyway. And if we're allowing greater density, then we need to start worrying about getting some of those amenities like the open spaces and things like that to make sure that people have a little bit of breathing room, a little bit of green space and those sorts of things. That's my opinion as a planner and how our code reads. But again, this is one of those philosophical kind of discussions that we need to figure out where we're going as a community. We are talking about, kind of the transition between small town and city living, going from the large lot kind of typical old school suburban development to something that's smaller and more dense and compact. And so this is kind of a transitional phase for the city of Oak Harbor.
Thank you. I hadn't thought about the lawnmower through the living room, but that's certainly a scary thought. I would prefer that we leave it the way that it is at the moment and let it go to city council as it's written. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Plumley. Any other comments? We can, if we're prepared to do it, make a motion. And of course, you either vote yay or nay as a commissioner. Are we ready for that, or is there other comment? Sarah, do you have any comment?
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner Wassner. I just have one question, and I apologize if I'm not capturing everything. There's limits to being on the phone, but I just wanted to make sure I'm understanding. If the 0 lot line option was available, while it's kind of I think the focus of it is on denser development. Would it also allow for, say, McMansions to go up, which are, 7,000, 8,000 square foot homes that are using every square inch of the property and kind of overshadowing their neighbors? Or is that not a problem with a potential problem with the zero lot line?
So the request, and maybe let me reshare my screen here, because I want to make sure that we're getting the information to you properly with regard to what this letter says. I don't want to gloss over this because it's important that everybody know, and like I said, it came in kind of late. But they say, to aid in the goal of reducing reliance on the PRD process, I believe it would be beneficial to include additional language that side yard setback for R2 and R3 zones. So in answer to your question, the R1 zone district is the single family residential zone district. R2 does allow for single family homes. And so in theory, yes, that could be an issue. I would recommend that if we were going to consider this at all, that it would only be R3 and R4 zone districts, because the R2, I think there is the potential for, I don't know if I want to use the word abuse, but there is the potential for unintended consequences. So the letter goes on to say, I believe allowing zero side yard setbacks on one side of the lot would encourage the development of duplexes and other attached structures. These zero lot line attached structures could then reside on individual tax parcel numbers, which is a chief benefit of the current PRD process, the ability to have fee simple ownership. As the setbacks are currently written, the multifamily attached structures would reside on one tax parcel and would have to be condominiumized to sell off individual units, or the end effect would result in a buyer having to purchase the entire structure and rent out one half, which goes against the goal of providing affordable housing. Simple as owning a duplex is more expensive than a single family home. Establishing a condo for a single structure also adds costs to the end product via surveying, legal fees, condo insurance, and administrative burden for the end user. He says for zero lot line proposals, the city could increase other side yard setback to 10 feet to have the same net effect. Same idea could be used for tri and quadplexes in the R3 zone district, could have internal lots be zero side yard. Zero lot lines may also present benefits for single family uses in the R1 zone district by providing flexibility for infill sites that have difficult topography. In conjunction with the zero lot line suggestions, I would also suggest reducing minimum lot width to 25 feet for R2 and R3 to encourage the creation of multifamily attached structures. 25 feet in width seems more than adequate to create an affordable and functional living space. For example, the units within McKinney Place PRD are 27 feet wide and provide over 1,700 square feet of living space and a garage. So that's the full comment there. And I guess my commentary on that would be that the PRD, I think, functions to essentially be a little bit of a speed bump for projects that are starting to get a little bit more dense and a little bit more of an impact to neighboring properties and to the folks who live within it themselves. And so I think in that situation, having the PRD for projects that are multiple units attached, even if they're on their own lots, makes sense. Maybe it doesn't work in all cases, but I think it works better than allowing just a zero lot line by right in multiple zone districts within our community, which I think starts to get a little bit, it makes me a little nervous, let's put it that way, because I think there is that unintended consequence aspect to it.
Thank you, Ray. Commissioners, we have any other questions, concerns? Could I entertain a motion?
Yeah, I can motion that we move forward to sending it as proposed to City Council.
You want to read the?
All right, I move to recommend approval of the City Council amending OHMC Section 19.20 regarding residential density standards in the R1, R2, and R3 zone districts.
I have a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
I have a second call for the question. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes. I'll close the public hearing. The next item on our agenda this evening is the Stormwater Manual adoption. And this is also a public hearing. And I hadn't heard from Dennis, but Dennis, are you there? Senior Planner?
I am
Dennis
here,
Lefevre.
yes. Can you all hear me?
Thank you, Dennis. I will open the public hearing now.
All right,
Okay,
thank you,
Dennis.
Mr. Chair.
Okay.
Good evening, members of the Planning Commission. My name is Dennis Lefevre. I'm a senior planner with the city. And tonight, we are going to be talking about stormwater and kind of going over stormwater and how it affects the city from a pretty high level. And I do have a PowerPoint which I'll share. Can you all see my PowerPoint?
Yes.
Okay, good. Thank you. I would be specific about the Stormwater Management Manual for Western Washington, which is basically the focus. But I think we need to take a step back and ask, why are we even talking about the Stormwater Management Manual? And one of the reasons is because the city owns and operates its own separate storm and sewer systems. And in order to, for us to legally do that, we need to be issued a permit. And typically what we are called is an MS4 system. And there are certain criteria that we meet that has tripped us into this phase 2 portion of the permit system. But essentially what the permit is it's issued by the Washington Department of Ecology, who is given authority by the EPA, and essentially the Clean Water Act has created the National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System. That's quite a mouthful, but it's the Npds. And because of our specific demographics and other criteria, we are considered a phase 2 city. Now, what does the NPDS permit do? Well, essentially it's reviewed and reauthorized typically every 5 years. The current permit that we're working under is from 2019 through 2024. The permit requires, for one thing, annual reporting to the Department of Ecology on a number of issues. One of them is involving development services. We need to do stormwater planning to make sure that the new development controls the runoff in conformance with the manual, as well as redevelopment and new construction sites for sedimentation runoff and that type of thing. The other item that falls more in public works is illicit discharge and detection and elimination of that discharge. They also have a public education and outreach program that reaches not only the public, but goes out into the schools and tries to teach about the importance of maintaining good stormwater practices. There's also operation and maintenance inspections that are performed by Public Works, and also source control inspections. Those aren't the only requirements that the permit hands down to us. As some of you may remember, back in the previous version of the permit, the 2014 to 19 permit, required us to amend our municipal code to incorporate low-impact development as the preferred and commonly used approach to stormwater management for new developments and redevelopments. It was quite an effort that we undertook at that time, but we did accomplish it in time by ordinance number 1784, which was done in 2016. We have been using LID practices and best management practices in all of our developments since that time. This new version of the permit, the 2019 to 2024, required the city to start looking at a watershed basis on a citywide basis to look at creating the first steps in a stormwater management action plan. There's going to be much more discussion on this as we go through, but the first piece that we needed to identify and create was accomplished back in March and submitted to Ecology successfully. The 2019 and 2024 permit also requires the city to adopt the most recent stormwater management manual for Western Washington, which is basically the focus of tonight's discussion. It's the 2019 manual, which I will get into in just a second here. So what is a stormwater management manual? Well, it's pretty simple, actually. It's a manual that provides a stormwater Npds permit implementation and management guidance. It tells us how to, very specifically and very scientifically, how to meet the requirements of the Npds permit that we are operating under as a Phase 2 city. The manuals are prepared by the Washington Department of Ecology. They're periodically updated, and the city is currently operating under the 2012, December 2014, it was amended, Stormwater Manual. But as I mentioned in the last Npds permit requirement is that we need to adopt the 2019 Stormwater Manual. It's quite a lengthy document. It's a multi-volume document that actually exceeds 1,100 pages. I did provide a link to this document as attachment 1 in case you have any interest in really getting into the procedures and practices of stormwater management from the statewide level. It's not a manual I have read completely through, so I'll be totally honest with you in that regard. But the types of differences from the 2012-14 manual to the 2019, which we are looking at adopting, is Ecology has indicated that this will be far more easier to use. Some of the significant changes involve simulation modeling changes, which means, from my perspective, it means that a proposed development has some modeling techniques that they can incorporate that will monitor the stormwater velocity and location and how to deal with stormwater on a regular basis for new developments. It also has some changes regarding hard surface redevelopment. The threshold has been updated. The equivalent area is updated. And then minimum requirements 2, 5, and 7 are updated. Now, I don't know exactly what those minimum requirements entail, but it does deal with basically implementation of low-impact development. It also has some additional sources of source control for BMPs, and in fact, it gets down to as detailed as how to deal with pet poop. And it also provides some updated wetland guidance for high-value, high-quality wetlands, which really will not impact the city from that standpoint. So other changes that have been proposed in the 2000, or actually are incorporated into the 2019 manual, are just consistency changes with other state rules and other programs that have been implemented. Now, I know this is kind of a quick presentation and a fairly high-level presentation from the standpoint of looking at some of these changes, how are they going to impact us. But the timeline that was given to us came up fairly quickly. And unfortunately, I would typically like to have a couple of presentations on a subject before I ask for a recommendation. But we are required to have this adopted by the end of June. So that puts us on a fairly tight time frame to get it in front of the Planning Commission, and then also have Public Works make a presentation tomorrow at the workshop. So in regards to our process, code amendments do follow a review process 5, which means we need to take a look and by ordinance, the amendment is performed by ordinance, and a copy of the draft ordinance is also part of your packet. The SEPA we are incorporating, that was done by Department of Ecology when they did the manual itself. We also need to have Department of Commerce give Department of Commerce notification that we are adopting a code amendment. And then it also requires a public hearing before your body, the Planning Commission. And then all actions that are taken by the Planning Commission take the form of a recommendation to the City Council. So that's what I'm asking for tonight, is to get your blessing on the proposed ordinance that will go to the City Council. And the recommended motion that I have from staff is on the screen, but I'd be happy to answer any questions prior to that.
So just to clarify, this basically is required by law for the city to adopt, and so there's really no option on adopting this. Do I understand that?
That's correct, Commissioner. Unfortunately, I've been in this position before with both the critical areas and low impact development requirements. But yes, again, this is a hammer coming down from the Department of Ecology that says you must adopt this manual by the end of June.
Great. And without reading through everything, just to clarify, if we recommend this as an adoption of the 2019 Stormwater Management Manual for Western Washington as written, there has been no additions by staff to this ordinance?
That's correct.
Thank you.
So there's no wiggle room. We just got go along with it.
And
I've
I might just add also that the motion that is on the screen includes sections of the municipal code that refer directly to the old manual, the 2012, 2014. So we need to change those sections of the code to reflect the 2019 manual.
And what is that? Is that just ordinance number 1945 replaces all the others then? Is that correct?
Yes, it would replace those sections and also adopt the 2019 manual.
I'm assuming that just makes reference to and doesn't go into the 1,100 pages of requirements.
You assume correctly. Those sections in the municipal code only reference the document itself.
Thank you. Any other comments?
Yeah, can I go ahead and
Blaine,
comment?
yes.
Yeah, Blaine Oborn, Oak Harbor City Administrator. Just to give you a little bit more background, especially for the new commissioners here. Dennis, you can verify, but I believe we're the only municipality in the county, in Island County, that's subject to this NPDS permit process. I think the commissioner chair understands that, and it does add costs. We talked about affordable housing, and this does add cost to developments in the city as opposed to outside the city in the county where you're not subject to this. Can you kind of speak to that a little bit?
That is correct, Blaine. We are the only Phase 2 community on the island, and I don't know exactly what the impacts will be as far as new development is concerned, but I'm sure it's going to create some restrictions as far as dealing with stormwater. Public Works, again, I wish they were here to indicate specifically what kind of changes we'd be looking at, but I do think there's also going to be some flexibilities with the improvements in the threshold levels. So there's going to be some kind of balance in there as far as new development is concerned.
Basically, I mean, not basically, but for the most part, you have to contain your stormwater runoff on your property that you're developing. Isn't that where we're going?
That's one of the foundational principles of the low impact development is to treat the stormwater on the site, and any impervious surface that is built on the site needs to, and that creates stormwater, needs to deal with it on the site is the preferred option. Of course, there's a lot of things that enter into that. Now, obviously, one of them is the soils condition. So if the soils condition just cannot take the water and absorb it and treat it, then there's other options available to that developer.
I have a comment here. I know we're going to, seems like a must pass sort of thing, but I just wanted to comment that we may want to come back to this policy in light of other policies in Oak Harbor, which are creating more density, great, and creating more affordable housing. But in areas of the state that are a bit more, they've already implemented these stormwater policies, and they have denser housing. Some of the issues that they see are, say, new owners of row homes are ripping out their green roofs, not knowing that their home was basically only constructed with a permitting to have that green roof. Or permeable asphalt goes in, but no one knows how to maintain it or clean it. So this may be something where the city needs to look at funding public engagement, education, or encouraging homeowners associations on multifamily owned properties in order to make sure these properties comply over time.
Yes, and that's a very good.
To talk with Colleen about that.
That's a very good point. And Kendall Sullivan, who is our stormwater person at Public Works, does a fantastic job of doing the outreach in public education piece of this, and also dealing with homeowners associations on a regular basis. But yes, that's a good point, and one that we need to continue to do.
Thank you. Are we ready for a motion? Commissioner Plumley, do you have anything? I don't want to leave you out.
No, I don't have anything. Thank you.
Okay. Any other? I'm ready for a motion.
I move to recommend adoption of ordinance number 1945 to the City Council amending OHMC sections 12.3.310, 12.30.311, 20.02.020, subsection 71, I guess, and 21.10.070, subsection 34, and adopting the 2019 Stormwater Management Manual for Western Washington.
I have a motion. Do I have a second? Sorry. I have a second. I'll call for the question. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Motion passes. I'll close
Thank
that
you,
public hearing.
Commissioners.
Thank you, Dennis. The next item on the agenda this evening is a public meeting. 2022 Comprehensive Plan Amendments brought to us by Principal Planner Kak Kamak. Kak, are you in the house?
Yes, I am. Thank you, Chairman and members of the Planning Commission. Kat Kamak, Principal Planner. I'm here to begin our discussions of the 2022 Comprehensive Plan amendments. I will be coming back pretty much every Planning Commission meeting till we adopt the amendments to discuss Comprehensive Plan amendments. So This will be a ongoing agenda item, and we will be covering quite a few topics throughout the next few months. I have a presentation. I'll quickly go over what is on the docket, where some of the current projects are, and what we're going to discuss tonight. We have several items on the comprehensive plan docket, but I'll let you know right now tonight's focus is mainly on the land use element, and even under that, we're going to cover a couple distinct element items. But we will, like I said, this will be a continuous discussion, and we will be talking about this more in the next couple of meetings. With that, I'll start sharing my screen. Give me a moment. I hope you can see that. It's just in my slide format. I'm going to have the slides to the left that guides the presentation, so you can see along what I'm talking about. So the items that are tracking for the 2022 docket are the housing element. As you all remember, the city adopted the housing action plan, and we have some funding slated later on this year to hire a consultant. So we are kind of working on that, and that's an ongoing process. So we'll come back to the Planning Commission and talk about some of the implementation items that we hired the consultants for. But what the density provisions that the Planning Commission discussed earlier with Ray Lindenberg is part of the Housing Action Plan and its implementation. So we are continually implementing that, and so that is an ongoing effort. Also on the agenda is the JPA UGA boundary and capacity. This is the ongoing discussion with Island County in terms of discussions with them about capacity and potential amendments to the UGA. Again, this is an ongoing discussion. We've had some recent kind of happenings in the south side of Oak Harbor that could potentially spur more discussion on this. And there'll be more information on this that will be coming potentially to Planning Commission later on. The transportation element, that is also on the docket. This year we have the active transportation plan, and that's moving forward. We have a request for quotation out currently in the newspapers advertised. We're getting a lot of interest, consultants calling us, asking us questions. The deadline for submitting proposals for that is June 6th. So we'll go through a selection process after that to hire a consultant. So that's also moving forward. The capital improvements plan, the City Council approved the 2021 capital improvements plan at its May 17th meeting. So we just got done with the 2021 capital improvements plan, and we will be soon discussing the 2022 comprehensive plan in a couple months. So that will be going forward to Planning Commission as well shortly. So the land use element, and this is something that I want to kind of expand on tonight for discussion. The land use element is also on the docket, and some of the changes that we want to consider this year, and I'll go into these in a little more detail, is to make some changes and corrections since we've did our major update in 2016. And I'll go over some of the details on what some of the changes we did and why we have some of the errors that we do. And then we'll talk a little bit about potentially trying to trim our regulations a little bit and trying to eliminate a couple districts that has seen very little action. We have some options on that. And then we'll also discuss some land use anomalies. And I have an example here, the Northwood B fire station. This one we will probably discuss at the next meeting. We're still doing some analysis and map research on these land use anomalies, so we're not complete with that work, but we will be coming back next meeting to chat more about that. We didn't have any sponsored amendments this year, so we don't have any of that. So to talk about some of the future land use changes and errors that we have caught since our 2016, let me kind of explain what we did. And in order to kind of understand what we did in 2016, I'd like to show you a little kind of illustration of how our zoning map and land use map are related and how things get implemented. What gives us zoning authority? So everything starts with the vision, which is in our comprehensive plan. And that's why our comprehensive plan is a very important document. So the vision allows us to create goals and policies, and those goals and policies allow us to create land use maps and classifications. So this is a primary starting point for any city that wants to implement development regulations. This is the backbone of the authority that the zoning regulations or any development regulations have. So this is where the policy documents lie. This is where the sub-area plans lie, and all of these are in the comprehensive plan. And from these, the zoning designations and the development regulations are in our municipal code. They're linked through the purpose and intent statement. So what we did, and let me share a land use map we had for 2016. So this is the land use map we had before our 2016 update. And if you look at the legend here, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, or 17 land use designations. And these all transferred to 17 zoning designations. So it was a 1-to-1 ratio. So the policy document and the implementation document had not much of a difference. And it didn't allow for the policy document to be flexible. It didn't allow for policy document to be creative. And so the same thing could be achieved by reducing the land uses, but keeping all the zoning classifications the same. And I'll show you what we did in 2016. And so this is our most recent land use map, and you can see the land use designations here. And we have 8 land use designations. So we went from 17 land use designations to 8 land use designations. And this creates an overall generalized land use map, which makes better policy planning and so on. So this is what we did in 2016. There's a lot of benefits to go into a more generalized land use map because in this generalized land use map, for example, the high intensity commercial land use designation will cover 3 zoning districts. It will cover the C3, C4, and C5 zoning district is implemented by for this land use. So the low density residential is further broken down into R1, R2, and R3 categories. So that's how generalized land uses work. So when we transferred 17 land uses to 7 land uses, we had some errors that got created in the map in that transfer. So that's the kind of change we want to make with this land use element. With the use of the comprehensive plan, with the use of these documents, we have discovered these errors, and so now we're kind of bringing them together to the Planning Commission to change them. So going back to my presentation, so one of the errors and corrections that we need to correct is the land use designation planned residential estate. And I'm going to jump back to my map for a second to show you where that is. So this is the 2015 land use map. And we have a residential estate as a land use designation. And this was designated for properties that are along Oak Harbor Road right by Gun Club Road. And you can see this light green classification. So this is classified as residential estate. And the reason for classifying them as residential estate is because they are residential properties in the county north of the 16th line, where we hold our line for residential. But these are existing uses, and in the planning to try and limit encroachment to NAS would be, the city at the time of adopting the comprehensive plan back in the 90s decided to try and maintain these as they are. So the PRE residential category was created with the purpose and intent to maintain them in their current density and not increase the density. So, however, in our most recent 2017 comprehensive plan and the future land use map, that designation did not get transferred correctly. It got transferred as low intensity residential. So this is primarily an error. We don't have any of these properties in the city, so we don't have to worry about anything right now. They are all in the county. This is a planning tool. So correcting this error is not going to change anything for the property owners. It'll revert back to their current status. And will maintain their current status even when they annex into the city. So it is a pretty straightforward error, but this is one of the errors that we need to change. So similarly, there are other errors, little properties that we have found, and I will bring them to the next meeting. We're still kind of working on those to try and get those all mapped out. But that is I wanted to just point out some of the examples of some of the errors that we'll be bringing forward for changing. So we have some errors. And then I have a category called land use trim. And this is something that we're looking to try and streamline our zoning ordinance so that it's easy for developers to know what our expectations are for every zoning district and to have a predictable process. If they have a use that's permitted in their zoning district, and if they have a plan to implement that, they should not have any too many issues going through the city and getting a permit and developing their property. One of the best ways to do it is to try and make it simple so that people can understand that. And one of the ways we can do that is to try and simplify our zoning ordinance. So currently we have two zoning classifications called Planned Industrial Park and Planned Business Park. And so these are properties that are, and I can show you a current map. This is a land use map. We'll get a zoning map here shortly and show you that. But these are properties that are along Goldie Road and Oak Harbor Road. And they were developed in the 80s and 90s with the idea about developing campuses, office campuses and industrial campuses. And so these zoning districts were created with a lot of process. They were almost like a PRD. You know, you had to go through and create master plans, and then you had to do phasing plans and so on. Well, since this code has been in place, we haven't had any development that has used this process. So we think by combining these two districts into the industrial district, we can still accommodate all of the uses. And since we have a pretty robust design guidelines and zoning regulations already in place, we can depend on those to provide the landscaping and provide all the other requirements that the city needs. And we don't need to have a separate planned industrial park or a planned business park to try and promote that development. So we can reduce our zoning classifications and just condense those into just the industrial district. And I will bring more information on this. We're working on this as staff in the background. We've kind of consolidated if you consolidate these districts all into one, planned industrial park, planned business park, and industrial all into one, there's only 5 uses that are different in these districts that we have to deal with, and we'll bring forward those discussions to the Planning Commission at the next meeting. So that's the work that we're doing to try and ease the development regulations and make them simple. And like I said, the land use anomalies, we're still mapping those, and we'll bring them back at the next meeting. So just wanted to give the Planning Commission an update on the work that we're doing on the amendments. There's no action. This is just for discussion purposes and for sharing information. So with that, I will turn it back to the chair, and I am open for any questions or comments that you may have.
Thank you, CAC. Commissioners, any questions, comments at this time?
I do have one.
Yes.
Thank you, CAC. I want to just real quick go back to the active transit plan. As you're looking at consultants to do that, has there been any thought, or I guess maybe it's just a comment, that it would be nice if they're also looking at the ADA aspect of it for those members in our community that are going to need some additional accommodation to take part in the active transit plan. I know that may change some plans, but is there any thought on asking them to make those considerations as they're presenting their proposals?
Absolutely. I think what we want them to do, we would want the consultants to give us what kind of like a existing situation analysis. So what they would do is go around the city to look at the existing infrastructure that we have. And when they make proposals to try and connect these active transportation networks, they'll have to identify for us the shortcomings of these connections, which will be for ADA or lack of sidewalk or lack of infrastructure at certain intersections to make these connections. So I am hoping that this active transportation plan will also identify safety projects for us because it is related to pedestrians. It'll actually cover a large area of topics that we're not thinking about. When we think of active transportation, we're thinking just bike lanes or trails. Well, these bike lanes, I'm hoping, will happen in the right-of-way, right? So we're talking about street parking. We're talking about sidewalks. All of these will come into play when we want to connect our residences to our commercial areas, to our schools, to our parks, or to our employment centers. When we identify those corridors that we want to improve, we have to look at how to make it easy for people to get out there, how to make it safe for people to get out there. And that's what this active transportation plan is to do, is to make it easy and safe for people to use. And in trying to accomplish that, we will have to look at the ADA requirements and all of that. So when we do projects, we have to look at that. So when we get, after this entire process goes through and we get hopefully some striping plans for streets to include these transportation networks, we'll also hopefully get a budget to find out how much it's going to cost to bring some of these ADA requirements and these connections up to code for that. So all of that will be included, yes.
Thank you.
Hi, CAC, Fee here. My question is whenever you talk about combining the PIP and the PBP, is anything going to be lost with that consolidation of those two? As in for planned business park, is something going to be lost if that is consolidated to where an option would not be available to them?
We're hoping not to. So in my initial look at all the uses that are in the 3 zoning categories and combining them, they seem to, other than, like I said, 5 uses that we have to consciously decide how we want to use them. So every use is either sometimes permitted or they may be conditional or they may simply be not permitted in a district. So they have like 3 statuses. So there may be a use in the PIP and the PBP that are conditional, but in the industrial, they're simply outright permitted, right? So we have to decide when we push these uses all into one district, should that use be conditional still, or should it be just a permitted use? I think those are the decisions we have to make. We're not going to lose much. The only use that I think that we could potentially lose, and we can talk about it more when we're talking about it in detail, is hotels and motels. Hotels and motels are permitted in commercial districts and along the highway and all of that, but they were a conditional use in the PBP, I think, with the idea that these business parks will bring people from outside the community and they'll stay close to these parks, but I don't think that has really panned out. And so I think we can have enough space for hotels and motels outside of the industrial zone. So that's the only use I think we have to think about whether we really want in that from the top of my head. But other than that, we shouldn't lose out on anything.
Thank you, Kat.
Hi, Kat. I have a question. Thank you. So in the consolidation that you're proposing, and by the way, thank you for your presentation. You're always so detailed and it's really helpful. I was wondering, would this mean this would place more retail, more offices, this sort of thing in what's been mostly an industrial zone?
Not really. I don't know if, I can't think on the top of my head if retail is a permitted use in the industrial zone or the PIP or the PBP. It doesn't introduce any new uses. All of these PBPs, the PBP, PIP, and the industrial district are all classified under the industrial land use. So in the policy, in the land use category, it is all just industrial, generalized land use map. The PIP, PBP, and the industrial zoning classifications implement that. So what we're doing is basically saying we'll implement it all with one district instead of 3 districts. So we're combining them. And so it's not introducing anything new into it.
Okay, thank you. I had one follow-up question regarding transportation. I'm excited to see, that we're talking about more pedestrian access and sidewalks and these sort of things. I would just say, it'd be lovely to see some kind of thought on, essentially, if we're creating multimodal transportation options for residents, are some of these essentially into tourist pathways right now? Like, it's interesting to see how many folks come to the island to bike through the island, right? Are we creating bike lanes not just for our own folks, but so there's sort of a smooth transition to bring people through the city and to tourist points, so they're not just hopping on through on Highway 20, right, and leaving the city. It'd be great to see some thought on how bike lanes or trails or other things could actually help us in terms of tourist revenue and local use at the same time.
Yeah, you tailed off there at the very end. Couldn't hear you, but I think your question was more related to the transportation, improving active transportation for tourism. And yes, I think that will be part of the plan. And Island County, part of this project is funded by grants that we got from the Regional Transportation Planning Organization. And so they have also goals and policies that cover island-wide transportation and tourism networks. So Island County has a pedestrian and trails plan, and we'll have to coordinate, ask our consultants to coordinate our plan to make sure we make those connections to the regional connections. And I think we should consider tours points as focuses to consider in our active transportation. However, I think the primary focus should be to facilitate transportation within Oak Harbor for residents to get to their commercial, recreational, and employment needs. And if we satisfy that, I think the tourism options will automatically happen. If residents of Oak Harbor are happy with active transportation and they use this network day in and day out, this system will develop automatically to be known for safety, and therefore it will automatically bring tourism. And tourists who come here will also indulge in that activity because it's so convenient to use locally. So I think if we cater to our local residents and give them the option to have a safe transportation option for all their needs, Oak Harbor is not that big. You can ride your bike or use your little electric scooter in Oak Harbor and go do your daily things. It's not that big. It's only when you travel outside Oak Harbor to work or go places do you need a car. And if you serve the residents, the tourists will be served as well.
Thank you.
Any further discussion? Thank you, CAC. The last item on the agenda this evening is our monthly development report. This is brought to us by Director David Kuhl. David?
To the Commission, this is our monthly report, and it's in your packet, which would be in your system. Today, if you haven't had a chance to review it, I've gone through some of the council action recently. We've reviewed gravel parking lots and roads in major city parks as a possibility with the City Council, and we had a favorable feedback from that. That, of course, is in our LID section of our code, so it would be designed, if we did go forward with that, to make sure that we're protecting the groundwater. Also, density standards, which you just talked about today, and the housekeeping text amendments were also discussed at the council. Hearing examiner under current planning, 3.9 acres on Crosby Road from R2 to R3. That's moving forward. The Mulberry Place subdivision, which is out on Swantown Road, as well as the Cedar Hill subdivision, which is out on Crosby, are two ongoing projects that are in review. Under building, the Scenic Heights development, which is done by Scott Thompson. That project has 3 or 4 homes under construction now. And then Mulberry Place Apartments is in review. Long-range planning on number 4. This is not an exhaustive list. As you can tell, CAC just went through a couple of items that are not on this list, but we have a number of things going as a staff. SEPA exemptions and threshold level update. Dennis is going to be working on that here later this year. And that's to change the SEPA requirements where the state law has changed, which allows us to up our thresholds and not require quite as much work on the part of developers to fill out checklists. Critical areas ordinance also, that's part of the shoreline work that Dennis did last year. And so he's going to be working on that later this year. Stormwater you just saw, as well as the active transportation plan by CAC. CAC also does annexations, and so you don't see those here. Those go to council, and he's working on a few of those right now. Tomorrow I'll be presenting RV parking and storage to the City Council in a workshop. And Ray Halsey, our code enforcement officer, and I, as well as the police chief, will be talking with the council about whether or not we should allow RV parking and storage beyond a 72-hour time limit. Currently, there's no time limit. You can store your boat and RV on the city street as long as you want. So we're going to be talking about that tomorrow. And then another update for you, the new electronic permitting system that we've been talking about a lot as we've been going along went live May 9th, and staff is happy. They're working with it. It's going great. And just we're really happy to have a centralized permitting system that we can coordinate with our Public Works Department, the Finance Department, Administration, and the Fire Department. So that's been really helpful for us. Last on your list is the next Planning Commission meeting, which is June 28th. And so we should have something for you that day. So thank you. Appreciate your attention.
David, the Marin project, is there a date for completion on that?
Marin Woods, which
Marin
is
Woods.
up on Swantown, I think that's 40-some units.
Some units, yeah.
Currently, I've been up there recently, and I've seen where they're putting in some concrete curbs and some other detailed work for the streets. All the utilities, I think, are underground and installed. So we anticipate that they would be coming in for building permits fairly shortly, and so that would be an ongoing project.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, David. Well, I think that sort of sums up the evening for us. If anyone has anything further for the good of the order? Otherwise,